Azerbaijani historians consider Abbas Koli Aka Bakikhanov the founder of Azerbaijani scientific historiography. The Institute of History of the National Academy of Sciences of the Republic of Azerbaijan is named after him. Bakikhanov was the son of Mirza Muhammad, Khan of Baku. For his time, he received good education. In addition to the local Turkic language, he mastered the Persian, Arabic, Russian, and French languages. From 1819, he served in the Russian army. He participated in the 1826-1828 Russian-Persian and 1828-1829 Russian-Turkish wars. He wrote fiction and historical works, also worked as a translator. One of his most prominent historiographical works is Gulistani-Iram, The Heavenly Rose Garden. It should be emphasized that he wrote it in Persian. The book was published in 1844 and translated into Russian under the title History of the Eastern Part of the Caucasus. The Azerbaijani translation of the book was published only in 1951. Azerbaijani historiography tries to present this work as the first attempt to write a complete history of Azerbaijan. The problem is that it can be considered a source for writing the history of Shirvan, Dagestan, and some neighboring areas, but not Azerbaijan, since there was no state of Azerbaijan in the region before that. The historical region of Azerbaijan is in the territory south of the Arax River, in Iran. In the work, which consists of a preface, 4 chapters and an epilogue, Bakikhanov covers the history of Shirvan and Dagestan and in general the East Caucasus since the ancient times to 1813. In the first chapter, relying on medieval Eastern sources, the author presents a brief history of the ancient period of the region. The second chapter presents the history of the region during the period of Arab rule. There is also a separate reference to the anti-Arab rebellion of Babak in the 9th century. The third chapter recounts the history of the region during the rule of Ilkhanate and Timurid empires, as well as the history of Shirvan Shahs. There is also information about Karakoyunlu and Ankoyunlu. The fourth chapter is devoted to the Safavid Empire, Nadir Shah, Ottoman-Persian Wars, Russian campaigns to the Caucasus. The last, 5th chapter describes the events that took place after the assassination of Nadir Shah until the conclusion of the peace treaty of Gulistan. In the epilogue, the author presents the biographies of renowned people of Shirvan and surrounding areas. Although Azerbaijanis consider Bakikhanov the founder of their historiography, in the comments in Bakikhanov's published books, they try to falsify historical data, presenting them in accordance with the guidelines of Azerbaijani state propaganda. In this regard, the famous Azerbaijani historian Ziya Bunyadov stands out in particular. He worked hard on Bakikhanov's book Gulistani-Iram, published in Russian, and it was criticized even by famous Iranologists Willem Marius Floor and Hassan Javadi. They point out a number of falsifications in the book. The prominent Soviet Orientalist Igor Diakonov recollects an interesting incident in his memoir regarding that infamous historian. Describing a party organized in his honor in Baku, Diakonov notes that the hero of the USSR was also present at the meeting, and he later became famous for publishing one of the medieval Muslim sources, carefully removing all references to Armenians. Diakonov makes an interesting observation in his book, also mentioning that although Azerbaijan was going to celebrate the jubilee of the poet Nizami, however, the medieval author was Iranian, not Azerbaijani. And why did Bunyadov and other Azerbaijani so-called historians deliberately distort the work written by Bakikhanov? The problem is that in his work, Bakikhanov, as mentioned above, repeatedly relies on the information given by Armenian historians. Besides, he also mentions about Armenians and Armenia from ancient times to his days. This, of course, can have no place in Azerbaijan's official ideological false historiography, where they mainly advance the false thesis that Armenians are newcomers and did not play any significant role in the region. As a result, it turns out that on the one hand, Bakikhanov is the founder of Azerbaijani scientific historiography, and on the other hand, he deviated from the modern Azerbaijani nationalist, anti-Armenian historical concept already in the first half of the 19th century. Of course, Bakikhanov, who lived in the 19th century, had no idea that he was an Azerbaijani and would become the founder of Azerbaijani scientific historiography. Here are some examples from Bakikhanov's book about Armenia and Armenians. According to Bakikhanov, the borders of ancient Armenia passed along the Kura River.
Comparing various circumstances and the testimony of historians, we can assume that the right bank of the Kura River formed the border of Armenia.
There is no mention of Azerbaijan. He refers only to Armenia, Georgia, and Caucasian Albania. Bakikhanov's book also includes the history of Saint Gregory the Illuminator and Armenian king Tiridates, the construction of Eshmiadzin, and other events related to the declaration of Christianity as the state religion in Armenia.
At the time when Tiridates came from Caesarea to Armenia, Gregory was among his entourage, but subsequently for not worshipping fire by order of Tiridates, he was subjected to painful torture, for which the king lost his human form, and only after sincere repentance and St. Gregory's prayers he regained his human form and accepted the Christian faith. It is believed that in 301 St. Gregory with his consent founded the Echmiadzin Cathedral in Varashapat.
The author quite justly presents this as the most important history of the early medieval Armenian state. There is no mention of Azerbaijan whatsoever. Bakikhanov also writes about the territories under the rule of Muhammad, the son of Seljuk Sultan Melik Shah.
Syria, Diyarbakir, Azerbaijan, Mugan, Armenia in Shirvan were inherited by Muhammad.
Here, by saying Azerbaijan, Bakikhanov refers to the territory of historical Atropatene. Thus, the author makes a clear distinction between Atropatene, Armenia, Shirvan, and Mugan as separate territories. In another part of the book, Bakikhanov, referring to the Russian-Turkish agreement concerning the countries of the region, mentions the territories that remained under the control of the Ottoman Empire.
The Turks, for their part, captured Armenia, Georgia, and most of Shirvan.
There is no mention of Azerbaijan in the South Caucasus. In another part of the book, while describing the events that took place in Artsakh, Bakikhanov states that with Melik Shah Nazar's help, Panah Khan, the chief of the Sarjaluk branch of the Javanshir clan, settled in Shushi. He notes that Panah started a war against the local Armenian Melikdoms.
Panah Khan, growing stronger day by day, subjugated the Armenian Meliks.
This part does not fit into the thesis of Azerbaijani false historiography either, according to which Armenians settled in the territory of Artsakh in the 19th century and did not have any power there. In another part, Bakikhanov mentions that the Qajars were one of the clans of the Jalairian Turks, who were displaced to Iran by the Mongol Hulegu Khan. There were about 200,000 such families.
Qajars are a tribe of Jalair Turks from those 200,000 families that were relocated by Hulegu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, to Persia. Emir Teymur Tamerlan resettled 50,000 Qajar families to the Caucasus region and settled them in Erivan, Ganja, and Karabakh, where they multiplied even more over time. Many of these Qajars were statesmen and ruled Armenia and Shirvan under the Safavid Shahs.
Afterwards, Tamerlane gave part of them, about 50,000 families, territories in the South Caucasus. Bakikhanov adds that later, during the reign of the Safavid dynasty, many of them held government positions and ruled Armenia and Shirvan. Thus, there is no mention of Azerbaijan, and according to the author, there are only Armenia and Shirvan in the region. Bakikhanov mentions that the mass settlement of Turkic-speaking tribes in the territory of the South Caucasus took place only in the 14th century. In the epilogue of his book, speaking about his travels, Bakikhanov mentions the territories he visited.
Under the command of the commanders-in-chief, I visited Shirvan, Armenia, Dagestan, Circassia, Georgia, Anatolia, and Azerbaijan.
Here, the author of the book again separates Shirvan from Azerbaijan, by which he understood the historical Iranian Atropatene. Thus, Bakikhanov, the Turkic-speaking historian from Shirvan, who wrote in the first half of the 19th century, unwittingly retorts Azerbaijani falsifiers, refutes their false thesis about the old Azerbaijani state, the so-called migration of Armenians, and Artsakh allegedly being non-Armenian.